What if the most dangerous moment in modern warfare isn't the first strike? It's the pause right before it. Right now, somewhere in the Arabian Sea, American warships are sitting in the water with their engines running, their weapons systems hot, and their commanders watching a clock that Tehran keeps trying to reset. If you think this is just another round of Middle East tension that will quietly fade away, you need to hear what's actually happening, because the people in charge have stopped whispering and started loading. Before we go any further, if you're the kind of person who wants to understand what's really going on beneath the headlines, hit that subscribe button right now. We break down exactly these kinds of situations, the ones mainstream outlets either rush past or get completely wrong. Drop a like if you appreciate real analysis, and share this with someone who keeps asking you why gas prices are doing what they're doing. They'll thank you later. So let me paint the picture for you, and I want you to really sit with it for a moment, because the reality of this situation is more fragile and more dangerous than most people realize. Iran is not negotiating. I need you to understand that clearly. What Iran is doing has a very specific name in strategy circles. It's called running the clock, and they've become extraordinarily good at it. Think about it like this. Imagine you're in a high-stakes poker game. You've got a mediocre hand, but you know the other player has a temper. So instead of folding or raising, you just take your time. Every decision takes longer than it should. You ask for water. You ask the dealer to reshuffle. You pretend to count your chips. You're not playing the game anymore. You're playing the clock, because you believe that if you stall long enough, the other guy will either get bored, get distracted, or lose his nerve. That is exactly what Tehran has been doing since late February. Except this isn't a poker table. There are aircraft carriers involved, and nuclear material, and an international waterway that moves roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply every single day. The operation that kicked all of this off, the massive US-led campaign against Iranian military infrastructure, began on February 28, 2026. American and Israeli forces launched coordinated strikes against Iranian nuclear sites, air defense networks, missile batteries, naval facilities, and command centers across the country. The initial damage was enormous. It was supposed to be decisive, and for a while it looked like it was. The Pentagon released footage of precision strikes hitting underground facilities. Satellite imagery showed craters where missile production lines used to be. Analysts on television spoke confidently about Iran's military capacity being shattered. But then something started to shift. Not on the ground in Iran, in the intelligence reports that were quietly making their way to decision makers in Washington. Here's what those reports actually said, and this is the part that should make you pay very close attention. Despite months of some of the most intensive bombing campaigns conducted since the Second World War, Iran retained approximately 70% of its operational missile arsenal. 70%. Let that number sink in for a moment. After everything, the bunker busters, the cruise missiles, the drone strikes, the coordinated operations, 7 out of every 10 missiles Iran had before this started are still functional. And it gets even more unsettling. American intelligence assessments confirmed that Iran had restored operational access to 30 of its 33 missile launch facilities along the Strait of Hormuz. Nearly 90% of its underground missile positions were partially or fully rebuilt. How is that possible? Part of the answer is architectural. Iran spent decades building deep underground facilities specifically designed to survive aerial bombardment. But another part of the answer is a decision that American military commanders made during the initial strikes. A choice to seal certain facility entrances rather than flatten them completely. The reasoning at the time was sound. Bunker-busting munitions are expensive, limited in supply, and the Pentagon was quietly preserving stockpiles for potential contingencies in other theaters, specifically the Pacific. That decision made strategic sense in March. By May, it looked like a miscalculation that Tehran exploited brilliantly. Because while the bombs were falling and then while the ceasefire talks were starting, something else was happening inside Iran that nobody was paying enough attention to. The political moderates didn't fill the power vacuum. The hardliners did. And not just any hardliners. The most aggressive, most uncompromising faction within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps stepped into the driver's seat and locked the door behind them. The IRGC didn't just survive the strikes. It restructured around them. It consolidated power over Iran's civilian government, positioned its commanders at the top of every meaningful military and security institution, and began operating with a level of internal authority that essentially made it the government. And here's where it gets truly interesting. Because while all of this consolidation was happening behind closed doors, Iran was doing something very public and very deliberate. On May 18th, Iran's Supreme National Security Council announced the creation of something called the Persian Gulf Strait Authority. They gave it an official name. They built it a website. They set up social media accounts. They gave it an email address. And what this brand new government body was designed to do was administer what Tehran described as regulated transit fees for any vessel wanting to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran didn't reopen the strait. Iran didn't negotiate over the strait. Iran built a toll booth on the strait and started sending invoices. The numbers being reported are staggering. Some vessels have already paid as much as $2 million per transit, and the payment methods tell you everything about Iran's strategy. They're accepting Chinese yuan routed through Kunlun Bank. They're accepting Bitcoin. They're accepting USDT stablecoins. Every single payment method is specifically designed to bypass Western banking infrastructure entirely. One major financial institution recently warned that if this toll system is allowed to operate permanently, Iran could generate between $70 and $90 billion in annual revenue from the strait alone. That's not a negotiating tactic. That's not leverage for a deal. That is the construction of an entirely new economic weapon. And Iran just institutionalized it with paperwork and a logo. Now, let's talk about what the United States military has been doing while Iran plays this game. Because the answer is not waiting patiently. What? CENTCOM has assembled around the Strait of Hormuz, and across the Arabian Sea right now is not a defensive posture. It's not a show of force for diplomatic purposes. It is a fully operational strike package that H has been positioned, armed, and rehearsed to the point where the only thing missing is an order. The aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln and its entire strike group have been operating in the Arabian Sea for weeks. But here's what changed recently. For the first time since this conflict began, CENTCOM positioned 2 full carrier strike groups in the same theater simultaneously. The Abraham Lincoln and the George H.W. Bush, both loaded, both in range, both running continuous flight operations. To give you a sense of what that means in practical terms, 2 carrier strike groups represent roughly 140 combat aircraft, thousands of sailors and Marines, and enough cruise missiles to fundamentally reshape the physical landscape of Iran's southern coastline. The EA-18G Growler electronic warfare jets embedded in those carrier wings can blind and suppress Iran's radar systems before any strike package arrives. The F-35C stealth fighters can penetrate what remains of Iran's air defense network without being detected. And the E-2D Hawkeye surveillance planes flying overhead can track ballistic missile launches and drone swarms across hundreds of miles of ocean in real time. But the naval component is only part of the picture. U.S. Marines have been confirmed operating ground-based rocket artillery systems at forward positions somewhere in the region. The M142 HIMARS launcher can fire guided rockets out to roughly 50 nautical miles. With longer-range tactical missiles loaded instead, that reach extends well beyond 100 miles. That puts every single Iranian coastal military position along the Strait of Hormuz inside the range of ground-based launchers that Iran cannot retaliate against without attacking whatever country those Marines are operating from, which would mean opening an entirely new front against a U.S. ally. Add all of this up: 140 aircraft, 15,000 service members, 2 carrier strike groups, ground-based rocket artillery, electronic warfare capability, stealth strike platforms, continuous surveillance coverage, and then ask yourself what it means when the Vice President of the United States walks up to a podium in the White House briefing room and says 2 words: locked and loaded. That happened on May 19th. Vice President stood in front of cameras and told the world in plain language that there are exactly 2 paths forward: a deal or a return to military operations. He said the United States doesn't want to take the military path, but he said the president is willing and able to go down that path if he has to. That is not diplomatic language. That is not a negotiating position. That is a final warning delivered with the full knowledge that every word would be recorded and analyzed. And here's the detail that most coverage completely missed about that same day. Before the vice president spoke, senior military and civilian officials had been gathered together reviewing active strike options. Not theoretical scenarios, not war games, active targeting packages. The President of the United States was, by his own account, approximately 1 hour away from ordering those strikes to begin. Ships were loaded, plans were set. The only reason those strikes didn't launch was because Allied leaders in the Gulf region called and asked for additional time. They described Iran as showing signs of being reasonable, and they requested a window to make one final diplomatic push, one phone call. That's what stood between the current ceasefire and the resumption of full-scale military operations. One phone call from allies asking for a few more days. Now think about what happens if that phone call doesn't come next time, or if it does come and the answer from Washington is no. Iran's response to being told that the American military is locked and loaded was not conciliation. It was not a counteroffer. It was not even a signal of willingness to compromise. Iran's foreign minister came out publicly and warned that any return to open conflict would feature what he called many more surprises for the United States, with lessons learned from the first phase of the war. Lessons learned. Think about those 2 words in the context of what we now know. Iran has retained 70% of its missile arsenal. It has rebuilt access to 30 of 33 Hormuz missile sites. It has 90% of its underground facilities operational again. It has a brand new revenue stream from its toll on international shipping. And it has hardline military leadership, that consolidated power specifically during the period when negotiations were supposed to be happening. The surprises being referenced are not hypothetical. They exist. They are loaded. And they are aimed directly at the carrier strike groups that CENTCOM just put on public display for the entire world to see. But the missiles are only part of the danger. There's something sitting at the center of this entire standoff that makes everything else feel like a prelude. Uranium. Specifically, approximately 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. To understand why that number matters so much, you need to understand one piece of technical context. The amount of additional work required to take uranium from 60% enrichment to 90%, which is weapons grade, is roughly 1% of the total effort it took to get to 60% in the first place. 1%? In other words, 99% of the scientific and industrial work needed to turn that stockpile into materials suitable for nuclear weapons has already been completed. The enrichment infrastructure took heavy damage during the strikes, yes, but the material itself is still there. It's still inside Iran. And Iran's new supreme leader has issued a formal directive prohibiting its removal from the country under any circumstances. Since the conflict began on February 28th, Iran has terminated all access by international inspectors. Every surveillance camera has been disabled. Every seal has been removed from every declared facility. The international community currently has no independent ability to verify where that stockpile is, what condition it's in, or whether any additional processing has taken place. 440 kilograms of near-bomb grade material, hidden from inspectors, inside a country whose military is now run by hardliners who believe they are winning. That is the actual problem, sitting underneath every ceasefire extension, every diplomatic meeting, and every deadline that keeps getting pushed back. And the negotiations over this specific issue have revealed just how far apart the two sides really are. The current framework being discussed involves Iran agreeing to pause its nuclear enrichment program in exchange for sanctions relief and the release of frozen funds. On the surface, that sounds reasonable. But the details are where everything falls apart. Iran has proposed a 5-year moratorium on enrichment. The United States has demanded 20 years. That gap is not a minor disagreement. It is the difference between a temporary pause that Iran can wait out and de-us, a generational rollback of its entire nuclear capability. Washington has also insisted on automatic extension provisions if IRA-N is caught violating the agreement, plus a separate clause banning underground nuclear facilities entirely. Iran countered with a single-digit number, and its officials have made clear that the core demand, surrendering the highly enriched uranium itself, possibly TO American custody, is something Tehran will simply never accept. Meanwhile, analysts have pointed out something that makes even a successful moratorium deal look inadequate. Iran has dramatically improved its ability to manufacture and install advanced centrifuge systems over recent years. Even if the current stockpile were somehow secured and enrichment were paused, the technical timeline for restarting a weapons program in the future would be significantly shorter than it was before the war began. So what is Iran actually doing with all this negotiation time? According to American officials, the current IRGC commander has taken the position that negotiations under current conditions are simply not possible. His stated demand is that the United States must withdraw all military forces from the Middle East entirely before Iran will engage in serious talks. Withdraw entirely, with 2 carrier strike groups parked in the Arabian Sea, with 15,000 troops in theater, with ground-based artillery covering the strait. That is either the most audacious negotiating position of the century or it is a genuine belief held by people who have convinced themselves that time is on their side. And according to intelligence assessments, this commander is now part of a small inner circle in direct contact with Iran's new and publicly invisible supreme leader. The same circle that controls both military operations and diplomatic strategy simultaneously. His bet, and it is a personal bet with the fate of a nation riding up to us, and it is that Donald Trump will eventually blink. That domestic political pressure from fuel prices and election cycle will force the United States to pull back before Iran's economy collapses completely. It is a wager that the world's most powerful military will lose patience with waiting and simply go home rather than fight. Which brings us to the fundamental question at the heart of this entire situation. Is he right? Because here's what's actually true on the morning of May 23rd, 2026. The American military is at peak readiness. 2 carrier groups are in position. 15,000 troops are deployed. The president was 1 hour from launching strikes 3 days ago. The vice president and secretary of defense have both publicly confirmed the force is locked and loaded. And Iran's response to all of that is to charge ships $2 million at a toll booth. It built on an international waterway, rebuild its missile sites behind sealed entrances, hide its nuclear material from inspectors, and promise surprises. Pakistan's top military commander flew to Tehran personally, Not a diplomat, not an envoy, the field marshal. L, who runs the entire Pakistani armed forces, carrying what sources describe as a final framework for peace. Qatar sent mediators. The State Department acknowledged slight progress. Diplomatic activity has reached its most intensive level since the war began. But a leaked draft of the proposed agreement revealed something telling. The most important American demands, dismantling the nuclear program, exporting enriched uranium, limiting ballistic missiles, cutting support to proxy forces, were not included in the immediate terms. They were deferred to negotiations that would begin within 7 days of the deal being activated. An agreement to agree later on the things that actually matter. Iran gets the war ended, sanctions lifted, and nuclear negotiations kicked down the road where it will have more leverage because the ceasefire will technically protect it. The United States gets the strait reopened in something it can call a moratorium. Or it all falls apart, because the positions are genuinely, fundamentally, perhaps irreconcilably far apart. And the people now running Iran's side of this equation have calculated, consciously, deliberately, with full awareness of the risks, that they can outlast the pressure. This is the moment where I need you to understand something that goes beyond the headlines and the military deployments and the diplomatic cables. What's happening right now is a test, not just of two governments, but of two different theories about how power works in the modern world. One theory says that overwhelming military force, applied with precision and sustained with patience, will eventually compel any adversary to make concessions. The other theory says that a regime willing to endure punishment, absorb damage, and restructure around losses can survive anything, because the country applying the pressure will always have domestic limits that the regime absorbing it does not. Both of these theories cannot be right simultaneously, and the next 72 hours may determine which one gets proven correct. If a deal comes together, even a messy, imperfect, paper-thin deal, it will be because both sides low-okied into the abyss of what the alternative looked like and decided they weren't ready to fall. Iran gets to claim it faced down the world's greatest military and survived. The United States gets to claim it forced a nuclear moratorium and reopened global shipping lanes. Both sides spin it as a win. Everyone exhales. But if the ceasefire collapses under the weight of positions that no mediator can bridge, then the president, who was 1 hour away from ordering strikeys, will not get another phone call asking for more time. The ships are already loaded. The jets are already on the catapults. The targeting solutions are already programmed. And somewhere in Tehran, commanders who rebuilt their missile sites behind sealed doors are counting on the belief that it will never actually come to that. One side sees leverage, the other side sees a targeting solution, and both of them are staring at the same clock. If this breakdown helped you see what the nightly news isn't showing you, do me a favor and pass it along to one person who needs to hear it. Drop your take in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to stay ahead of what's coming next, that subscribe button and the notification bell are the only things standing between you and finding out about this from a headline instead of an analysis.